it up.
This is Channel 253. Beep, boop, boop.
On this episode of the Grit and Grain Podcast.
During Prohibition, a lot of the bootleggers and gangsters and stuff were going all the way up to Canada and bringing back hard liquor. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking, well, why, if they're going to all that trouble to bring in hard liquor, why aren't they bringing back beer? Well, the answer was, we were still making it here. So there wasn't, why go to all that trouble? Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Did you know Channel 253 is member supported? I'm producer Doug Mackey, and I hope you will show your support by going to channel253.com/membership and join. Thank you.
Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast, where we explore and celebrate the craft beer industry, community, and history in Tacoma, Washington, and surrounding Pacific Northwest areas. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast, coming to you guys from the historic Parkway Tavern in Tacoma, Washington. Woo! Woo!
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thanks for hanging out. My name is Matt McLaren. I'm here with Ron Swarner.
Hello. I had to recreate it. It's the best I could do.
It's good.
It's tough to impersonate what you've already done.
Right.
I know. You guys missed a puberty joke in take one.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And Sean Jackson.
Yes.
What's up, buddy?
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
If you guys can keep that up for the whole podcast, I'd appreciate it. And then Doug's on mic too. What's up, Doug?
Hi, everyone. It's Doug Mackey, producer Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you hear this voice this week, you'll know who I was. Last week, who knows? Did
I not say?
No, you didn't.
Okay. Well, I'm going to regret that for the rest of my life. Thanks.
It's all better now. It's all better now.
It's cool. I definitely don't replay that stuff in my head. Thanks again for hanging out. Like I said, and if you guys are ever free on Wednesday afternoons, you're welcome to come to the Parkway and hang out with us live while we do this. It's a lot of fun, and you get to talk to some of these guests live and in person, which is amazing. Plus, we like a live laugh track, like we made historic jokes earlier because it's very fitting for today. As you guys know, we try to tie history as much as we can into this podcast, and one of the reasons that we do it at the Parkway is because of its very, very rich history in Tacoma. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. Tacoma has a crazy beer history, and we've dived into it before, but we have a particular guest today who can do it much better than we ever could. Doug, who are we talking to today?
Our guest today is a genuine Tacoma luminary and the foremost historian in Tacoma, especially Tacoma historian in Tacoma. Mr. Michael Sullivan is with us.
Woo!
Yeah. Very happy to have Michael here.
Hello, sir.
Thank you very much. By the way, I've heard all the history jokes already. So.
Oh.
But you're doing okay.
We might squeeze out some new ones today, don't worry.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Any of them go with bones and boners? Has that one been tied in yet?
He'll find
Okay,
one.
good. Yep.
He'll find one.
I think we just covered it.
Yeah. Thinking.
We warned you, Michael.
See how we are, Michael?
Thank you so much again for coming through to talk to us. We are relatively underqualified to talk about beer in Tacoma's very rich history. And we, as much as we've tried to cover it, I feel like you're much more qualified to tell this whole story. And so we're super excited. I am pretty sure I'm going to learn plenty today. And even just a few minutes we've chatted before getting on the mic, I'm just so stoked. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Great to be here, you guys. And thanks for the beer, for the Heidelberg. It's a hot, sunny day, and I've got a perfectly chilled Heidelberg in front of me.
Which seems fitting.
All things are good in the world, right?
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Sean, what are you drinking, man?
I also am enjoying a Heidelberg, as well as some Pelican Mother of All Storms.
Yes.
And some 2016 Avery Sam Ales.
Man.
Yep.
Same. Yeah, same. Doug also same.
Yeah.
Excitedly, Doug has we've got Machine House Caskback.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I'm so excited for.
Very
All
much
is
enjoyed
right
that.
in the world.
Yeah.
You have the first beer that Bill made in his new brewery.
Oh,
On
gosh,
tap right
what
now.
was it creatively called?
The first one.
Oh, that's right, the first one.
I'd have never guessed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill's English, so you know.
Yeah. He ties his dry humor into his beer names all the time. We love you, Bill.
Yep, we do.
We do.
Being Irish, I'm not impressed by British. Least of all beer.
Yeah. You should have heard him talk about Manchester breweries.
Right.
He said they all cheat by putting sparklers in their casks.
They don't call it sour for anything, so for nothing. Yeah.
Well, shoot. I mean, if you're down, I would love to just start at the beginning. I mean, Tacoma has this crazy rich beer history.
Yeah, we do.
How far back does it stretch?
Like from the beginning of immigration, contact with native people here, there was beer. And I was joking about the British, probably the first explorers here. Always got their daily ration of grog, so they were drinking beer. But no, the first time, Tacoma kind of starts with the coming of the railroad. A few years after the Civil War, 1873, and
Yeah.
the Prairie Line and the whole big business about Transcontinental Railroad, and it really kind of opens up the spigot. Sorry about bad. But anyway, for immigration, and we start having just like instant. Murray Morgan, the great historian here, refers to it as instant city. I mean, we really
sure.
did kind of in a burst. It was like a gold rush or something. Suddenly, the Transcontinental Railroad reached saltwater, port city, terminal cities, identified. Here's where it's going to be. Everybody dives in, real estate, all that kind of stuff. So in that first wave, really in 70s, 1880s, big part of immigration from the east out west was straight from Europe through the east after the Civil War. And so big part of the first waves of immigrants coming out here were German, Swiss, that kind of central beer-making region of Europe. So their beer-making traditions they brought with them were from that part of the world. So they were, it was primarily a lager. They were making lagers pretty much. So a little bit more complicated than ales to be able to make. And there was a little bit more requirement because the taste in those days was for it to be cold.
Right.
So early on, all of the beer makers had ice houses. The railroad, got up close, and people would wagon down ice. And so the early beers were done that way. Beer was all, by barrel, and sold in taverns and pubs. So we had a huge brewery, Puget Sound Brewery, that starts late 70s, 1880 roughly, and it's massive. I mean, it's 1,500 people working there.
That's
They're
crazy.
knocking out 300, 400,000 barrels of beer a year.
That's
Which
like
is-
even in today's metrics, that is huge.
Yeah. That's almost 1,000 barrels a day.
Yeah. That's
So, but
enormous.
again, it was the railroad. The deal was Tacoma was the terminal of the railroad, so and they encouraged the breweries, and all the breweries were down in where we think about the brewery district, kind of between where the university is and where 25th is, kind of in that general area. And the railroad owned all that land, and it was thrilled to be able to sell land to brewers to be able to set up their operation.
We've talked a bit about the water quality in Tacoma has always been like super ideal, especially for like traditional Czech and German style beers. Very soft, very beer friendly, and so some of the springs that were established early down there, where breweries were kind of built around, made a huge difference in sort of where they were all, where they all ended up popping up in that brewery district.
Yeah, if you walk on the Prairie Line today, city has paved part of it and striped it for parking, which fucking drives me crazy. But, but if you walk along the prairie line, there's open water running along there, and that's coming out of the springs that are along that hillside. So Columbia and Pacific, the big breweries, all had water coming right up into the, into the operations.
Yep.
And you're right, it was great. There wasn't a lot of mineral in it.
Nope.
It was just, really clean, clear.
It's almost
clear
identical
water.
to Pilsen in the Czech Republic. It's
Cool. I didn't
if you
know
do
that.
a Ward
Yeah,
Labs
makes sense.
test, you can look at all of the minerals, and if you look at like historical levels in the Pilsen region where Pilsner was invented, it is almost a shot for shot like mirror image in terms of like the mineral profile in the water.
Yep.
So we were built for it from the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. Great.
Yeah.
Michael, do you know anything about the Donahue Brewery that was in the late 18?
I've heard the name.
Yeah.
So by 1880, there were 5 fairly big breweries down there. Puget Sound was the big one, but there were a number of smaller breweries, and I think some of the smaller breweries weren't necessarily in the German style. They
Okay.
were making other styles of beer, and there were ale makers too. But beer, I don't know. You guys probably know this better than me, but the alcohol content in beer was higher then. And I don't know how they got higher alcohol out of it without the taste. And the ale, as I understand it, the ale was lower in alcohol content, what was made. So for some reason, everybody kind of drifted towards, I think it was cheaper in the taverns too to buy lager style beer.
Okay.
Could be at
And
that point that lager as a style was more highly developed, and so you had yeast strains that were generations older and probably more developed than some of the ale strains. So it's possible that they died off at lower ABVs, and then lager strains being more developed might be able to survive at higher alcohol percentages at that time.
Yeah, because you probably heard this. This was true of most of the big breweries around here. You could drink beer all day long on the job if you worked in the brewery. So
Yeah.
you could. So I think they probably didn't want you drinking the strongest beer possible.
Sure.
They were in an important job.
Absolutely true.
Damn, that barrel leaks.
Oh, yeah. Got to stay hydrated,
Yeah.
Back in those days, were we also exporting beer?
Big part of it,
Yeah.
yeah. We were
Down to
we
California.
were shipping out as much as we could consume. Big parts of the beer was shipped by boxcar by the railroad, and that was the other thing. The railroad loved to have the brewery here because they could then deliver the beer out along the line all the way back through some of the dry states even. So it was, and they were loading ice onto the cars that were carrying the barrels so they could deliver cold beer. So Yakima, Spokane, all the way back.
Right.
Of course, just about every town of any size had a local brewery. They were making local beer. But the first brands to really develop a brand name and really start to be well known all the way back to the Dakotas were coming out of Tacoma. Later out of Seattle too, where the Rainier Brewery is that you drive by on I-5 going into Seattle.
Right.
But even that brewery was not as big as either Puget Sound, Pacific, or Columbia, the 3 big breweries in Tacoma.
That's crazy to think about.
Yeah. Well, it was all the railroad, though.
Yeah.
The railroad really, because they could, the railroad loved, I'm sure the railroad even helped along with the marketing side because
sure.
they made money off the delivery fees.
Right.
So they'd love to have you buy beer from, if you're in Spokane, they'd love to have you buy Tacoma beer rather than Spokane beer because
Sure.
or even Yakima.
Because we got to ship it.
Because you got, they made money on the shipping rates.
Sure,
so,
sure.
Yeah.
It sounds like a big racket, but it was all
Railroads? No.
Totally, it was totally fine.
Ferris.
Don't you remember Brakeman Bill?
Yeah, they a Tacoma brand on a beer keg was always a good sign.
Really?
Yeah, great tradition. Yeah, great reputation all the way along.
That's always something I've wondered is like back then was Tacoma like I mean, you answered it, but yeah, I've always wondered if Tacoma made the difference. If it said brewed in Tacoma on anything, like because we had so much going on, there's a highly developed industry here, and the quality just might be naturally higher than what you might get in other places. And so that's so interesting to hear that at one point Tacoma was the gold standard.
I think the brewmasters who were making the beer were German trained and came with a long tradition, and I think excellence and consistency was a big deal for them in terms of building a brand.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah, hundreds of years of history
and the
behind
big
these
one,
guys.
the big brewery that grows bigger than Puget Sound, the Pacific Brewery, which many building at 25th and Holgate downtown, those brick buildings there. Remember there were a few years ago there was a big fire at Holgate and Jefferson. That big brick building that went up in flames was the ice house for Pacific Brewery. And where Elf Storage is today, ice operation, that then was the Pacific Brew House was a big double-lined brick building, like a 5-story brick building just for ice. It had an outer 3 brick thick wall on the outside, and then a cavity that was about 3 feet wide, and then another 3 feet thick wall inside of that. And the entire cavity was filled with sawdust.
Oh, wow.
And so and it had big doors at the bottom of the wall so they could refill it. But the sawdust created insulation.
Oh, sure.
And in the early days, then they would just bring bulk ice down and just to keep the beer kegs cold. So it was, and that building was just for storage. It was. The Pacific Brewery operation was massive. They had their own stables. They had beer wagons, their own logos and painting on all their beer wagons, and then this really is a big part of understanding the layout of the city. Actually, if you know where Commerce Street is, where light rail runs when you're in the core of downtown, well, Commerce Street on one, below Commerce is Pacific Avenue, and up above it is Broadway. So all the fancy stores, bars, restaurants, oyster houses, everything had their storefronts on Broadway and Pacific, and their back doors were on Commerce. So Commerce was this corridor that ran all the way to the brewery district. And in the mornings, you would have the beer trucks and the garbage trucks and everything else would almost like a service corridor through the downtown.
It was a delivery alley.
They would come down. So in the morning, they would start out and the beer wagons would come down Commerce Street, and they would then just offload kegs of beer into the
back
shops on either side.
businesses.
It was great. You hear these stories of these old draft horses, that would pull the beer wagons, and they'd have blinders on the beer horses, and their entire lives they would just run that route delivering beer wagons. And after a while, the guy doing the beer delivery would offload a barrel and slap the horse, and the horse knew where the next tavern was and would just walk down and stop in front of at the back door of the next tavern while the guy dropped
Was
off
slinging
the
a
beer.
barrel in
Yeah,
one
and
of
then
them.
in the evenings they'd have another wagon that would come along.
All right, it's
and
11
pick up.
steps that way.
Yeah, exactly. So this blind horse knew its way, How many guys stumbled out of those bars and couldn't even find the one they came out of, and this horse knew everyone on the street.
I always wonder if, when those guys are rolling those beer kegs into the back doors of those businesses, if there was a dude on the side of the thing going, "Hey, you can put that in my wagon over here."
Yeah. That's where that joke came from. Yeah. Did all the
Shout out
breweries
to all the
own
delivery
the taverns
drivers.
in town?
No, they didn't, and there was a big deal about that because some taverns had multiple kinds of beer, but a lot of taverns were loyal to a particular brewery, and a lot of that was tied to ethnicity too.
Okay.
So the German beers, if you were a worker and you went into the German, Germana Hall or one of the German places, then you'd probably be buying Pacific beer. Anton Huth was the owner,
Right.
old German traditional lager type beer. And that was kind of the standard. That was the Budweiser of the day, if you want, was Pacific. And then the other brews were all kind of, there were several of the Scandinavian, like down on the waterfront and stuff. And, you guys, I don't remember how this goes, but a lot of the Scandinavian workers and the Croatians who worked on the waterfront more had their own choices of smaller, different kind of beer. They didn't like the standard German stuff. And their taverns tended to buy all their beer from the smaller breweries that made in that style,
Right.
So, and I think about it, Ansel, some of the Dutch and Norwegian, Scandinavian style beers are, they're really light and watery kind of tasting, but they're a little different than the German Pilsner style,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it might just be sort of inherited historical taste.
Yep.
Goes better with open sandwiches.
And and we need to keep in mind that we're talking pre-prohibition, so there wasn't a national standard. I mean, there wasn't Budweiser or Coors.
Right.
I mean, every town and every ethnic group, and and so much socializing went on around, social clubs and the Swiss Hall, and was a dance, and they all had their own style. They all had their favorite local brews, and it was. And I had always heard there was a brewer, and I've never come up with a name, that made a Wit beer here, a white Wit beer.
Oh yeah.
That was like, I don't know,
Probably
8%.
magic at that time.
It was a ass-kicking beer.
Sure.
Must have been bananas.
But that was
Okay,
and
Ron.
you guys probably know this. Is Wit beer's Belgian, right?
It is Belgian.
Yeah. So it's in the Belgian style.
It is
This was a
traditionally not
brewery.
as high ABV as that, but it's very distinct in its flavor. And I imagine at that time, when like lagers and much lighter sort of Norwegian style beers were so prevalent, something like a wit beer that has kind of these spices and fruits in it, as it often does, was probably just mind blowing to some people.
Yeah, corianders and all that
orange.
kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and very early on, the breweries all were making what they sold as, even before Prohibition. A lot of people think near beer comes along with Prohibition, with the Volstead Act, because it's underneath that definition of intoxicating beverage. But actually, they were making just what we would think of as near beer, like
Really?
half of 1%, just as a way of keeping, if they just to be able to carry water with liquid just to get, if you're working hard
sure.
out in the
Rehydrate,
woods,
Yeah.
and you just wanted to be able to hydrate.
Yeah.
And a little bit of alcohol, I think, probably helped a little bit with just the water staying. You don't want to drink the water. In the deep
There was plenty
woods,
parts of the world where
so-
it was much safer to drink the wine or the beer made from the water than the actual water itself. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, that's how people survived and stay hydrated. Fermentation purifies dangerous water very well. So drink your beer, stay healthy.
Yeah.
Coach,
So if you need another reason.
the more you know.
I have what might be a dumb question, but I will ask it anyway. And I will preface it by saying, acknowledging the smart-ass answer to this is freeze water. But the question is, how did they produce ice back then?
We think the glaciers are disappearing now because of climate change. In those days, they were disappearing by people cutting ice.
They did
That was
actually
an
just cut
industry,
ice and bring it down.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Until Spaten invented
There was actually
the
a
freezer.
guy who once proposed to Charles Wright and a business and was selling stock in it, that was going to build a system of rampways from the glaciers of Mount Rainier and be able to slide ice down.
It's a flume.
Like
It's an ice
5
flume.
miles of these ramp systems.
Oh, my.
And they would slide the block ice down.
Holy shit.
And finally, one of the investors said, It's not going to work even in winter because the friction caused by the ice.
We'll just melt it.
So it never went anywhere. But anyway.
Can you imagine getting hit by a block of ice going 180 miles an hour down a hill?
or living under it.
Sean, there's a jam in the ice chute. Go unclog that.
Here comes the Netflix story.
Ends up being a nice water chute by the time it gets
I know. I was going to say, if there's a clog in the ice chute, you can probably just leave it for a minute and it'll fix itself.
And the first water slide could have been invented 50 years before.
Oh, it's so many ice jokes for one episode. Good question, Doug.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Doug.
Refrigeration was 100% invented by a brewery in Germany.
Okay.
Beer saved the world.
Wasn't quite sure when that happened.
Well, the railroads were all over. When refrigerated railroad cars came along, they bought them up as fast as you could make them. In fact, learned this recently that the big company that started making money, Pacific Carr, which was a company in Seattle, started out making the wheel trucks, the wheels for railroads, but they were the ones who started to make boxcars and then figured out how to make refrigerated boxcars, made a bunch of money on that, got into making full-size trucks after, at the start of the Depression, and that became Kenworth, which is the Kenworth truck.
Wow.
Holy shit.
That's amazing.
I didn't realize it stretched back so far. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
well, PACCAR, it's cool. Those trucks the truck industry all kind of comes out of the timber industry around here. Kenworth came out of two guys in Seattle, and Peterbilt came from a guy named, two people, Al and Ida Peterman, who lived here in Tacoma.
Oh, wow.
And they were in the timber industry, and they got into making trucks, and now they merged, now Peterbilt and Kenworth are part of PACCAR.
Right.
But that's all from Seattle and Tacoma, and all came out of that era. And both those companies had roots making refrigerated cars and making cars for the railroad,
For beer.
In the old beer days, yeah. So beer is the beginning of modern trucking industry.
That is 100%.
In fact, next time you're driving on I-5 and your rearview mirror fills up terrifyingly with the grill of a giant truck, just be calm and think how cool it is that logo up there is homegrown. Cool. Hey, it's a Peterbilt. It won't hurt as bad when I.
That's not going to shake the Final Destination nightmares that I have every night. But
Anyway, we digress from beer. I mentioned Anton Huth. Here's a cool guy. Anton Huth is fascinating. He gets here really early. 1888, I think, he arrives. Starts Pacific Brewery, which becomes the big daddy down there in the brewery district. It really does become the big one. And he expands not only in building other breweries. He had a brewery. He ended up building a brewery in Everett, and he built a brewery in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But he was centered here in Tacoma. But he also then went into restaurants and real estate and stuff. So if you go down to Pacific and 15th, that brick building where the Pacific Grill used to be, I'm not sure what that restaurant is now. But if you look up on that building, you'll notice there's beautiful carved stone on there.
Yeah.
There's a guy's head carved into the stone. That's Anton Huth.
oh shit!
Yeah.
I did not
The beer
know
guy.
that.
And then he built the Carlton Hotel, the Carlton building, which is there kind of right behind Tollefson Square, right above that really nice 5-story, 4-story red brick building as a hotel. About 1910, he built that. And Carlton was his son. And when Anton died, Carlton took over and ran the Pacific Brewery. But he was... God gave tons of money. Holy Rosary Church right now that's threatening to be lost.
Right.
He was one of the big investors, financiers of getting that church built.
With his
gave
beer
a lot of
money.
money to schools. It was beer money.
Good for him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, a lot of people, that church probably had the largest number, that church probably owned more to the donation plate every year to the beer industry than any other church in the city.
Good point.
That if that church was built on beer, and it was German Catholics, the vast majority of whom were in the
That
beer
would do it.
industry. So. And I hope that Archdiocese, I can't believe the Archdiocese is going to let that building be torn down.
Yeah,
It breaks my
goodness.
heart to even think about it.
Come on.
So, and it wouldn't be inappropriate, you know. I mean, that I don't want to get on the wrong side of the Archbishop here, but
I am.
but you know, if a use happened in there that was community assembly and stuff, and it involved beer, there would be no saints or ghosts that would be critical of that. They
Sure.
would-
Yes.
you know, if that
That's a
saves
good
the
point.
church. If beer saves
Yeah.
the church, great.
Yeah,
Nobody's
exactly.
offended.
What connections do we have in the Archdiocese? We've got some, right?
It would be
Pretty
you
sure
if
we
any
do.
of us.
I'll make some calls.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's already break time, but we're going to take a super quick break and be right back, so stick around. I know. Yeah, welcome back. Thanks for hanging out.
You're not a high libertarian. Of course you can't read it.
Oh, man. That was pretty good.
We digress.
I know.
That's funny because I had him pegged as. You think you know someone?
Oh, man. My stomach hurts now. All right. Thank you guys for hanging out during the break. As always, a quick shout out to Doug, our wonderful producer.
Barley wine.
And to Barley Wine. And to Phaedra. We love Phaedra.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And you may have heard it on the break, but please do check out Channel 253. It's amazing. And you should absolutely become a member and support that because it is a fantastic way to stay connected to Tacoma. Yeah, let's get back into it.
My question is, how does Jack the Bear play in all this?
Oh, sad story, isn't it? So for the Tony folks in town, the Tacoma Hotel, which was down on A Street, right where the Frank Russell building, it was something recently, insurance or something. It's not Frank Russell anymore. Yeah, what was it? Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, there used to be this awesome, giant, big Tudor-style hotel there, designed by Stanford White, who's like the best New York architect. I mean, it was kind of the showplace of the city. And the bar in there, they had a bar and a big restaurant and all that stuff. But the bar, the corner bar that went on the outside onto the veranda was kind of legendary. I mean, God, Mark Twain drank in there. I mean, Rudyard Kipling. I mean, all the big names and stuff. But anyway, somewhere along the way, somebody brought in a bear cub, and they created a little, a black bear, and they built a little sort of enclosure outside the bar, and people would just, oh, isn't that cute? And then, 2-3 years, not a little bear anymore. But Jack was calm and liked people and stuff. And at some point along the way, they realized that, a little bit of beer helps Jack calm down even more.
What?
And in time, they thought, well, Jack, everybody likes Jack so much, we should just let Jack come on in.
Oh,
and
man.
they figured out
Rad.
They figured out a mug for Jack, and Jack learned how to drink out of the mug, and it was a novelty, and people would come from all over to go to the Tacoma Hotel and go buy Jack a beer, and Jack would drink beer with people in the bar. It was awesome,
Yeah.
But then
Doesn't end well.
I can't. There's no way. There's no way this ends well.
Paradise Lost, Nothing ever goes perfectly. And anyway, one night, I don't know, maybe Jack was, too many people were just buying beers for Jack or whatever. And Jack got outside and just couldn't sleep and got outside the enclosure and started walking down A Street. And down at A and 10th, a young rookie cop who was probably a teetotaler had never been in the bar, didn't know that they had a friendly bear, the beer bear down there. And he saw a bear on the street, and he pulled out his revolver and plugged him on the street.
Wow.
Didn't die right away, but they couldn't save him.
What kind of bear was it?
It was a black bear.
That's what I fucking thought.
It's a black bear. Yeah. So, Jack.
We get everything we deserve.
Part of Tacoma's sad
Rest in
animal
peace.
history, I might add.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, if you know this down.
Yeah.
I thought this bear was going to get in a fight with somebody or something like that.
That's what I thought it was gonna
Yeah.
be like he doesn't like being touched. They're like, ooh.
I was waiting for that too.
Poke the bear?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah,
There's a
no
few
wet willies.
It's so
There's a
sad.
few photographs and stuff, but nobody really knows what, that's kind of the sad story of Jack. Too bad.
Did the animal stuffer mechanism
Yeah,
person
I don't
get
know
all
if
the-
Jack's a rug somewhere. I don't know.
Never-
Jack's at the Skoog.
I've already got the Sarah McLachlan playing in my head.
Speaking of sad stories, Prohibition came along.
Good segue. Good
bringing it
segue.
And historians look back on that period in American history and call it the progressive era. But anyway, but
That's why we
it
were
actually
first.
was progressive. About 1909 here in Washington State, we passed women's suffrage. We passed, we passed recall, referendum. I mean, a lot of the tools to be able to throw the bums out, kind of on a political side. And we started, once the first election came along, when women could vote, 1910, we were voting. Women could vote in Washington State a decade before the 19th Amendment.
Damn.
Damn straight.
Good job, Washington.
Yeah.
Really fucked it up a couple years later.
Yeah, and women were allowed in taverns here, by the way. Not
That-
only
yeah.
allowed, but patronized the taverns here.
Yeah.
So we had several ladies' taverns that were a little bit nicer, a little bit food and stuff, so they got along. Yeah, the delicate
Coasters.
Yeah. But anyway,
There was coasters.
Doilies.
in that first election, first thing we did was recall a majority of the city council, thereby ruling, and getting rid of the mayor, Angelo Fawcett, who was a big-time supporter of anti-prohibition, but the vote also went against serving alcohol. Now, in fairness to the push against alcohol and prohibition, for families in those days before Social Security and Workman's Comp, there was a lot of problems with just alcohol abuse for workers, especially when it was hard, rigorous physical work, or it was wage earning work in the woods, and you'd be gone for 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
You'd get your check and you'd blow off some steam. And so what happened was that when that problem hit, it affected whole families. And so we can't be too judgmental about the fact that women did largely vote in favor of prohibition.
I feel like there's a lot of reasons why that makes a little bit of sense
yeah,
back then.
Yeah, and it was something that we were going to deal with in one way or the other. So by 1914, we enforced prohibition in Tacoma. It passed and it took effect, and the next year it took effect statewide. So it never.
Hey, Tacoma beat Washington State?
We passed it locally, yeah.
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 Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
But-
I knew Washington State was a forerunner,
But we didn't adopt the language of the Volstead Act, which said there won't. They took the spirit of the Volstead Act, which is intoxicating alcohol. The breweries, though, which because so many people worked in the breweries, it was such an important part of the downtown business, and because Tacoma was you have to understand the character of Tacoma. It was a place where, for guys who worked at sea or in the woods or in the mines or whatever, they came to Tacoma. We had 10,000 theater seats in Tacoma in 1910 downtown.
Wow. Holy
so
shit.
people came. They came to drink beer. They came, to drink, to spend their checks, to be able to deal with the telegraph, to be able to send messages home, and and that was a big part of the economy, was what came out of that. So, and so when Prohibition comes along, trying to stop that, let's call it entertainment, or just that wage earner sort of come to the city to kind of, it just wasn't going to happen, and it never did. The big breweries never went out of business here. Local enforcement had all kinds of rules in our local laws that were in favor of the breweries. So by 1910, we were starting to pass law. We passed a weird law that said anti-treating law, which meant that because in some of the bars, what would happen was people taking advantage of somebody who drank too much on a payday would come in. Sometimes bars would run a tab on somebody, and a guy would get his paycheck, and he'd hit the bar, and by the time he left, that paycheck was gone, and his whole family, for a week or 2 weeks, they were out in the dark.
Yes.
And if you drank too much, sometimes it was the bar run by bad bar guys. Sometimes it was hangers-on. And the idea of treating was that you couldn't go in and treat somebody. The bar couldn't buy your first drink. And a third party couldn't buy you a drink because people were coming in and they would spot somebody who just got a paycheck, and they would get them drunk, and then they would run the bill up on them. And so we had this law passed, an early progressive law, that no treating. Somebody couldn't buy you a beer. You had to pay for your own alcohol. That was the way it went. And you had to post a sign that said no treating. And and the letters had to be at least 10 inches high. And every bar had to have a sign that said
So you could read
no
it after
treating.
a few beers.
Well, 10-inch high letters or 12-inch high letters.
Yeah.
So what all the bars did is they made these signs up, and the letters are so close together and so long line that the whole sign that said no treating was, the letters were
4
10
inches
inches high,
wide.
but the sign was like 2 inches wide. So you couldn't read it, but
You
it
have to tilt
complied.
it horizontal to look at.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
So that was the beginning. Also, the local interpretation of the language of the Volstead Act that said intoxicating beer, they could then pick the alcohol level that they thought met that requirement. This is entangled with what later happens with the 3.2 laws about interpreting whether
Shout out to
beer
Utah.
that was low alcohol wasn't technically intoxicating, and so you could still make it. So Pacific Brewery, Columbia, the other big one at that time, that could go ahead and mass produce beer at the time, started to produce near beer. And the near beer they were producing here is probably in the 1% to 2% range. It was still pretty, in terms of flavor and taste, from what I understand, it was still pretty close to the lagers they had been making.
Sure.
But they had got, so they didn't make it by just watering down their normal beer.
Right.
They actually
brewed
brewed
it from the
it
ground up.
with that alcohol level. They went for that and made it. So for a long time, you could still, and in fact, there was never a time when you couldn't buy beer in town, and where the taverns and stuff didn't sell it. The other thing that kept the breweries, the big breweries, going was they got into soft drinks. So they were making near beer, they were making soda pops, and there's this proliferation of bottled soda pops that came out. And the breweries were the ones that were producing the soda pops. The
Hard
breweries
seltzer?
that were big enough.
Sorry.
And you know, by the time Prohibition comes along, we've just gotten to where beer's available in bottles, kind of the way we buy beer at a grocery store or something, today. So they switched over the bottling plants to making soft drinks and near beer, and you could still buy near beer. And then out the back door, there was never a time that the breweries weren't brewing their best quality beer just to keep, keep the the gift alive.
That sounds like a
their
fantastic
talent.
segue into organized crime in Tacoma.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of work
Ron was in
around.
charge of segues today. He's doing so good.
Yeah, there was a lot of workarounds. People wondered why during Prohibition, a lot of the bootleggers and gangsters and stuff were going all the way up to Canada and bringing back hard liquor.
Mm-hmm.
And you're thinking, well, why, if they're going to all that trouble to bring in hard liquor, why aren't they bringing back beer? Well, the answer was, we were still making it here. So there wasn't, why go to all that trouble?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And the 1920s, Tacoma was Tacoma's city municipal budget was somewhat dependent. A big part of it was dependent on the entertainment taxes we had that were somewhat
sure.
informal, shall we say.
Sure.
So the brothels paid their share, the brewers paid their share, everybody kind of paid in.
Can't be the hub of all of those workers from all of those laboring industries in the middle of all of that and not have an entertainment tax.
So the politicians were more than willing to look the other way in a working town, and we were a town that was viewed. Seaport cities, if you're going to be a fascist, seaport cities are such a problem.
Nobody is more progressive.
Because there's people coming and going, different languages, different ideas, religions, color of skin. I mean, everything you can think about is coming and going and in exchange, and there's marketplaces for everything, and you just can't enforce anything, let alone, not laws that directly affect lifestyle, but not, you can't pass laws that affect
I'm happy to know
religion
that
or
Tacoma's
politics or
defiant
whatever.
diversity has existed since the beginning. Amen, man.
Tacoma has been, and this is true of seaport cities all over the world. They're just, they are tolerant. They have to be tolerant places, or they don't survive. You have to be
Right.
open
It's a
and
commerce
tolerant.
town.
And going all the way back to the welcome figure in the Puyallup people here, the tradition of the Puyallup people here at this beautiful natural harbor in Commencement Bay was a welcoming culture. They never were a warrior tribe or warrior people. They were always, let's welcome, let's trade, let's, let's celebrate together and potlatch and share, and it was just the way we were. But anyway, on to Prohibition. There was, you could argue that organized crime was operated as a headquarters. You could almost argue that City Hall was as much a headquarters for organized crime as some of the other buildings in town. But Prohibition, and mainly this was around hard alcohol and around just the distribution of hard alcohol. And it after the First World War, getting into like 1919, 1920, we started to have pockets of the city that were pretty well controlled by what we would think of as organized crime today. They were using the bars primarily for gambling. We didn't have open gambling casinos or anything, but gambling, gaming machines early on, what we would think of as pinball machines and pinko type machines. A lot of those were ways for organized crime to get into the taverns, and then they wanted to tap into the economy of taverns
Of liquor.
So they had their hands in the gambling aspect of it, in the illegal alcohol, and you go through the city directory in the middle of Prohibition, 1925, and there's a pages full of taverns. What? It's Prohibition.
Yeah.
But no, they were still operating. And of course they're advertising.
Still had a phone number.
The best cold soft drinks.
That's why we all went.
That's why everybody went, was for, they had the best soft drinks. But anyway, and there were parts of the city during that time, 20s and into the 30s, where we started to develop some pretty dark districts in the city. where prohibition was pretty much, taverns and prostitution were pretty well, and gambling were pretty well concentrated. A man named Peter Sandberg, who built the Schoenfeld's building, that's getting renovated right now.
Yeah.
When that building was built, 10-story concrete, high tech in its day, 1909 when that building, 1907 when that building was built. Peter Sandberg was the biggest raconteur in town. He ran brothels and bars and stuff, but he was dealing in the underworld side of Tacoma.
Right.
So beer was not something that was exclusive to the dark underbelly of the city. It was more work. It was just universal. It was part of lifestyles, and it was good and bad. It was recreation. It was, socializing. It was church socials. It was fundraising. It was all the good things, but it was also it was connected with the, with the not so good side. So we had when. Carlton Hughes took over the Pacific Brewery from his dad when Prohibition started, or Prohibition had already started, but his dad died into Prohibition. Anton never saw the repeal of Prohibition in '32.
I see.
But his son Carlton took over, and he really tried to keep the brewery going somewhat, but they were in pretty bad financial trouble. That was the era where Pacific Brewery, it was so big scale that they really didn't make it through. And Carlton ended up selling the building, the Carlton building that his father had built, which was kind of the centerpiece of their empire. And he sold it to a man named Frank McGinty. And McGinty and Vito Catone, two Italian guys, really had pretty well taken over control of organized crime.
I was going to say, those sound like mob names.
So McGinty moved his office into the Carlton.
Calls him like a season.
Yeah. So the Carlton then gets kind of this dark side because McGinty's mob are sort of operated out of the Carlton. Vito Catone took the penthouse apartment in the Winthrop building, and where there was a radio station and everything. And so those two guys didn't get along. So that's where you read about the sort of noir side of the city and organized crime during Prohibition. Yeah, and they come out of Prohibition in '32 both stronger than ever, and they stay in the rackets. And that's really that. Then it shifts over. As we get in the Second World War and after that, then organized crime pretty well gets into prostitution and gambling, drugs a little bit, then. But beer ends up being not lucrative enough. It was just so. Once Prohibition ends, there wasn't any money in beer. Everybody drank it. It was cheap.
The margins on beer.
Mike. Preaching to the choir, buddy.
Even the mob was like, wow, I'm not trying to be broke forever.
One vacation every how many years?
I can't believe it's already been an hour. I'm going to lose my fucking mind because I could seriously do this forever.
Please, Dad, can Michael stay over the night? I know it's still night. Please.
I hope that you would be willing to come back and
I would. I feel bad
My
leaving
goodness.
us in the middle of the Prohibition. I mean, we haven't even come out of it.
It's a great cliffhanger.
I'm looking at my Heidelberg beer here and thinking, we haven't even got to the Heidelberg.
know.
Sigmund Romberg. You know who Sigmund Romberg is?
I would love to hear about
The
it for like
student
another
prince?
hour.
Oh, yeah. Well, look him up, and next time we're on, we'll talk about it.
Okay, we'll make a plan for part 2. Before you go, where can people find all of your work? You've done much more than talk about beer your entire life.
Yeah, I taught Northwest history at UW for like 20 years, more than 20 years. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of the stories and work of my students and just my own work and everything I poured into my website. It's just tacomahistory.live.
Yeah.
And the one problem with radio, you guys, or podcasts, are there's no pictures. And I sort of love film and pictures. So the choice pictures that I've come across over the years are all, and film and audio and other stuff is all,
Are all
on my,
there.
Nice.
on my blog.
Beautiful.
So please
Oh, yeah.
check it out.
hope
And you
you
said
guys
there
will
was
pick
one problem, so that was nice. I've
We'll
got
get
seven
it.
in
We'll
my
get a
head,
nice.
but, you know.
We'll get a nice picture before you leave. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I have a quick fuck up story. Do you remember last week when I had a DJ name?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yep.
All right, Grit and Grainers. Email us at cheers@gritandgrainpodcast.com with your comments, opinions, and possible history classes at UW-T, such as the History of Pow's Donuts, 1996 to present, the Real Housewives of Columbia Brewery, circa 1903, and Tacoma's Landmark Preservation Commission versus Heidelberg building taught entirely with raps like Hamilton. We read and drink everything we receive, and we try to respond as quickly as we can. If not online, then on air. You can subscribe to Grit and Grain on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher, and please leave us a review. Also, check us out on Channel 253, Douglas. Yep.
Yeah.
And gritandgrainpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for episode notes, beer news, and entertainment ideas such as grabbing a bottle of Prairie Line barley wine that Sean Jackson will brew someday at E9 Brewery, and Girl Trouble's Hit It or Quit It album. Dance the dance in your overpriced apartment wearing your Jack the Bear slippers in front of A, your significant other, B, your cat, or C, the microwave. Send us photos and we'll try to get them hung at the Lucky Silver Tavern. If this podcast is not what you expected, please alter your expectations. Grit and Grain would like to acknowledge a shameful plug. That cork of bottle of 1999 Cuvée de Tommy that we left by the heater. Right? Shameful plug?
Shameful plug. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
No
Yep.
such thing as a bad time to visit Tacoma. No such thing as too much barley wine.
Yeah.
Tune in next Friday for more sweet chatter. Cheers.
Cheers.
You'll be back.
Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us at Grit and Grain Podcast wherever you get your social media and catch new episodes every Friday. Cheers.
Good up.
Channel 253 is a member-supported podcast network. I'm producer Doug Mackey, and I'm asking you to become a member and show your support. Go to channel253.com/membership to join. Thank you. Grit and Grain is part of the Channel 253 podcast network. Check out our other shows: Nerd Farmer, Interchangeable White Ladies, Move to Tacoma, Crossing Division, Citizen Tacoma, What Say You, We Are Tacoma, Flounders B Team, and Taco Man.
This is Channel 253.